welcome to Telespark's live session. My name is Zack Anderson. I'm the Director of Youth Education here at Spark. And today we are talking about animals of all shapes and sizes, and actually 4 shapes and sizes, because we're going to be talking about 4 animals in particular. We're going to be talking about elephants, we are going to be talking about ducks, we are going to be talking about caribou, or reindeer, if you prefer to call them that, and wrapping up with squid, which is appropriate because of all the tentacles. But those 4 animals are what we are going to be talking about. So start dreaming up questions, and we are going to start very conveniently with the elephant. Do we have any questions, Jacqueline?
Hey, Zach, yeah, let's start off with the elephant. We have a question here. Is the elephant's anatomy similar to the human anatomy?
Great question. So I have a fuzzy elephant that's going to be my helper for the elephant section here from our store, which is coming in pretty handy. But we actually have right here a transverse section through the anatomy of an elephant. And you can see it's very big. But what I can point out to you is parts like the brain, the lungs, ears, the liver down there is that dark spot, and those big spotty sections down at the bottom end there, those are the intestines and the digestive tract. So elephants actually have pretty much the same parts that we do. They're just in different shapes and sizes because elephants do very different things than we do. I mean, obviously, look at their nose, right? It's a little bit different than ours and used in a different way. So, yeah, good question.
All right, Zach, how do elephants communicate?
Great question. So elephants have to communicate in a lot of different ways because elephants, you can even see in this little stuffy, they live in groups, right? So mom and a baby here, and they would live in big, big groups, and they need to be able to communicate with each other, just like we need to communicate with other humans. So they do it in a lot of different ways. They'll make grunts, they'll make that famous sound, right? And one thing they'll also do is they'll make a sound that is really, really low frequency, like a bass guitar, but so low we can't even hear it. It's called infrasound. And if you're standing by an elephant and they're making that sound, it actually feels like your body is shaking because it's such a low frequency and so shaky. Those sounds actually travel over much further distances than the normal kind of higher pitch sounds that we hear.
Ooh. We have some more questions coming in here on Facebook and YouTube. Why are elephants so big?
Great question. Why are elephants so big? So elephants are the largest land animals on the planet, and there's 3 species, right? So there's the savanna African elephant, the forest African elephant, and then the Asian elephant. So they're all very, very large land animals, and they're large because that's kind of how evolution has shaped them, right? So being large means that they have access to food that other animals do not, right? So becoming larger, they get to the ability to grab, tops of trees, like maybe only other giraffes and things like that might be able to grab, or bigger fruits with bigger seeds. So they can eat all kinds of things. They're basically like bulldozers, right? They'll push over entire trees and eat them. And so that's a big part of it. Plus, when you're really big, it makes it a lot easier to not be eaten by the predators that live around you as well.
That's always a big plus, eh, Zach?
Absolutely.
So we know that elephants are really big, and we have a question here. Forgive me, it's JC or Jackie. How many bones do elephants have?
Oh, great question, Jackie or JC. That, you know what, they would have pretty much the same number of bones that we do. The difference would come again in the body forms, right? So like their tail is going to be a little bit longer than ours. So we have a coccyx, or a tailbone, which is a bunch of the fused tailbone sections together, whereas an elephant would have a long tail that they use, for helping them swat at flies and things like that. But other parts of their body, they'll have kind of fusions and separate, but more or less the same number of bones doing approximately the same things. The big difference actually that I just thought of are the teeth. So elephants only have 4 main teeth in their mouth at any time, whereas we have a lot more than that, right? And elephants go through 6 sets of teeth for their entire life.
We have a question here from Nora, who's 7, and Nora wants to know why elephants have tusks.
Great question, Nora. And within tusks are great. And what's really neat about them is they're actually a type of tooth as well. And they're the same as our incisor teeth. So the ones that you would use to bite an apple, those are what elephant tusks are. So the tusks are used as a tool. So they're handy. Like I said, the elephants in their wild habitat, they're basically like bulldozers. So they can be coming in pretty handy for pushing things over. They can be handy for digging things up. They can be handy for battling other elephants, especially male elephants might have really big tusks for kind of pushing against each other. And you know what? They're even handy as just a shelf when your trunk is really tight. You can just rest it on top of your ivory like that. So they have a lot of uses. And what's interesting though is African elephants, males and females, will typically have the big long, not always, but often have the big long tusks. Whereas in Asian elephants, it's really only the males that have the big long visible tusks. Females still have them, but they're just much smaller.
Why is that? Do you know?
Why is that? Well, it's probably something to do with they need them less for their survival, right? So if they needed them, females would have big ones too, like to fight off predators or something like that. But if they don't need them, it's kind of evolution is like a use it or lose it game, right? So if you don't need it, it's going to be cut out. And males probably need it, but I should note that not all males Asian elephants have the big tusks either. So it's only a small percentage of them. So it is kind of one of those things. Yeah, good question.
Truly fascinating, eh? We have a question here from Toby on Facebook. How do elephants sleep?
Great question, Toby. So elephants sleep in a couple of different ways. They're pretty big. So imagine them laying down. They don't lay down very often because it's pretty darn hard to get back up again. If you're in the savannah and lions creeping up, there's not many lions that'll go after an elephant, but there's some. And so you don't want to be laying down because then you're making food, right? So what they'll typically do is they'll just kind of rest standing up. But when we get into the section of sleep called REM, which is like when we would be dreaming, right? And all of our muscles go bleh, right? So during that time, the elephants have to lay down. And that's a very, very important part of sleep that is still being studied to exactly know why we have it. But that's where we typically have dreams, and they think it has something to do with memories, which of course are pretty important for elephants.
We have a question here from Atticus, who's 7. Do elephants have good eyesight?
Good question, Atticus. An elephant has an eyeball about the size of a pool ball. So about like that. So they have pretty big eyes, but they're not the elephant's strongest sense. So they have good vision, but I wouldn't say they have great vision. Of course, you can tell probably by looking at their face what their primary sense is, and that'll be, of course, their sense of smell, with a big nose like that. So they see okay, but they wouldn't see like as well as we do. We're pretty near the top of mammals in terms of visual what we can see.
Truly fascinating. We actually have some new folks joining in. Do you mind telling us what's next to you?
Oh yeah, so this right here is a transverse section of an entire elephant here. So basically a transverse section means kind of going through like that, right? So you can see this right here would be the skull, right? In these spaces, elephants actually have hollow spaces in their skull to make their head a little bit lighter for carrying around. You can see the brain. Then you get into the chest here where you'll have the lungs, muscles, heart, and then down, that dark section is the liver. And then you have spaces where the intestines would be, and then of course the end of the elephant there.
With this anatomy slice, are we able to see the elephant's ear?
Yeah, we definitely can see the ears. And this right here, this little hangy doodle off there, that would be an elephant ear. And what you can see is there's no bone in it, right? So elephant ears are cartilage like ours. They're just much bigger, right? In an African elephant, they're really big. In an Asian elephant, they're quite a bit smaller, right? And that's because they live in different environments and their ears help them to cool off and fan themselves. So African elephants have to have bigger ears to help them survive in their environment. Asian elephants don't. So it's a good way to be able to tell apart the different types of elephants.
And it's really cool to see that our anatomy is very similar to the elephant's anatomy in that sense too.
Totally.
Even in our ears.
Yeah, right? Could you imagine if we could move our ears like an elephant?
I think it would make us cuter. Dexter, who is 5, is actually wondering why their ears are so big.
Yeah, that's a good question, Dexter. So kind of the big thing is that there's a couple of reasons, right? And it has kind of become multi-purpose. So one of them is it's like a big way to cool off, because in your ears, even if you feel your ears, they feel warm to the touch. And that's because our blood is running through our ears. And if you have bigger ears, that means there's more blood. And ears are pretty thin, which means, if there's wind blowing, they'll blow away that hot air from your blood and help you actually cool off. And of course, where elephants live, whether it's in India or Africa or China, it's pretty hot, right? So they need to have those big ears to help them cool off. But the other advantage there is they can also be used for visual signals. Like if an elephant has its ears out like this and is looking at you, it's probably kind of grumpy. But not always. It just means it might mean it's alert. But they're a way of signaling, kind of like your dog, right? Your dog's ears move with its mood, right? Or your cat, same kind of idea for an elephant. It can be helping with visual communication as well.
And I gotta ask you, Zach, so elephants' ears are really big. Does that increase their ability to hear sound?
Yeah, elephants have a really good sense of hearing. I mean, their ability to collect sound is really, really good, but their ears aren't kind of, have that cup shape like ours do that funnels sound in because they need them like as fans, but they still serve the same purpose. So their ears, like, they're not like way better hearers than us, even that they have these big old ears. But they actually can hear different sounds than we can, right? So like I mentioned earlier, is that like elephants will communicate with really low frequency sounds that we can't hear, but elephants actually can. And that's because their bones and their parts of their inner ear are tuned to be able to hear those different frequency sounds.
Awesome. We do have a question here. One more question from Michaela, who's 8. Do you know how far they can hear?
How far they can hear? Pretty far. Not as far as they can smell. Right. So, I mean, it's not like if you're at a zoo or something like that and you holler at them from one end of the zoo, they'll hear you coming. But they do have a pretty far range. So they can hear probably pretty similar to what we can, maybe a little bit further by comparison. But I don't have an exact number for you, but their hearing's pretty good.
Sweet. Let's move on to this anatomy slice over here.
Sure.
So this one over here looks like an elephant leg, right?
That is an elephant leg. And what I want everyone to really look at, and one of my favorite things to talk about with elephants, is that they're the biggest land animals on Earth, and they're actually walking on their tippy toes. You can see right here, their bone, right, and it's supported by soft tissue, so muscles and cartilage and things like that. So despite their size, they're pretty light on their feet. They're like giant ballerinas, right? And what's interesting about that is it allows the elephant's foot, when they take a step and you look at their feet actually expand to be able to support more weight. And it also makes them very quiet. For such a large animal, they're virtually silent. So, yeah.
We have a question here from Aaron, who is age 11. What does the elephant skin feel like? Do you know?
Yeah, I do actually know. Elephant skin is kind of rough because elephants don't have a lot of hair, right? And the hair that they have is bristly and kind of comb and brush like, right? So it's kind of rough, basically, is the best way to describe it. It's not smooth like our skin would be. It's kind of rough, a little like light sandpaper with bristles coming out of it. Yeah, that's a good question.
So we've moved on to the blood vessel configuration. And I know that you wanted to focus on the duck one. Can you give us some few facts about this one?
Yeah, so ducks are one of my favorite birds. They're really great because, of course, right now, this time of the year, they're starting to appear. You see them at all the wetlands and everything. And we have so many great duck species here around the Calgary area, but there's more than 180 species of them around the world. They're really diverse. They're very visible. They're very fun. And they're pretty neat. They have some pretty cool adaptations that we can talk about that help them survive. This one here is based on a domestic duck, which is descended from the mallard ducks, so the ones with little green heads that we would see, right, and like places like Prince's Island and things like that. But so that's what this one is here. But there's many, many, many different types of ducks, and they all have some pretty cool adaptations. So we'd love to hear some of your questions about ducks.
Zach, I gotta ask you this. You gotta debunk this. Are ducks and other birds really related to dinosaurs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yeah. Ducks are, and all birds are actually living dinosaurs. So they're descended from the same family that you would have found the guys like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus, the theropod dinosaurs, the meat-eating dinosaurs. One small group of them decided that, well, they didn't decide. They became birds, right? Evolution, they were naturally selected to become birds and whatnot. But what's interesting and what we've learned about more and more as we learn about paleontology is that group of dinosaurs, the meat-eating dinosaurs, the theropods, had feathers all over their body. So even a guy like T-Rex would have had feathers. Velociraptor was probably covered with feathers. The big guys like Strythiomymus, Ornithomymus with big long necks that look like ostriches, they covered in feathers, right? So, and we know that from fossils that we found. And what's interesting is ducks are actually a really, really prehistoric type of bird. They're one of the older types of birds, one of the first types of bird groups that came around in evolution. And they were actually around as ducks while dinosaurs were still around. So ducks and all birds are living dinosaurs, but they were also birds while other dinosaurs were around. And yeah, I could talk about dinosaurs a lot more, but we'll do that another day.
We want you to keep talking, Zach. But I do got some questions in here. Do ducks have teeth, and how do ducks eat without teeth?
Yeah, I mean, birds don't have teeth, right? Because If they did, that's, I mean, they don't feel super heavy in our mouths because we're pretty used to them, but that's a lot of bones that you're carrying around your head. And birds have tried to reduce as much of their heavy body weight to be able to fly, right? So when I was talking about elephants, if you don't use it, you lose it in evolution. Well, that's kind of what happened with ducks and birds, right? So they don't have those teeth because they don't need them, right? To be able to fly, flying is a pretty important thing for birds. So to that end, though, ducks and like the relatives like geese, depending on what they eat, will have their beak, their bill, adapted for eating that particular food. So things like geese and ducks that eat a lot of grass and plant material, they'll have little serrations, so little edges on the edge of their bill for pulling off that grass, right? Whereas some of them, like a merganser, which is a duck that dives underwater to hunt fish, they have little ridges on their beak to grab slippery fish and things like that. So it does vary, but they have different adaptations to help them grab their different types of food. And ducks eat all different types of food because there's many different types of ducks.
Zach, we actually have a Biology 20 class joining here with Krista, and they're saying hi.
Hello, Bio 20.
We have another question here from Monali, and Monali asks, which dinosaur is a duck descended from?
Great question. So we can get technical. They're not technically descended from an individual dinosaur, right? So what we say in biology is that they have a common ancestor, which means at some point there was a branching off, and dinosaurs went this way and birds went this way, but they're within the dinosaurs. So the rest of the dinosaurs, so their closest relative would be something like those small meat-eating dinosaurs, a kind of a dinosaur like Sinosauropteryx or a velociraptor or something like that kind of thing, right? So one of those small meat-eating dinosaurs, in an earlier form like an Archaeopteryx, which is a pretty famous ancient reptile, would have been kind of like on the way to birds kind of thing. So it's hard to say exactly what their closest relative that they descended from was, but they did come from within the dinosaur.
We have a question here from Sean, who's on YouTube. What do they eat?
What do ducks eat? So it depends on the species. So most of them will kind of eat a little bit of everything, right? So there's different kinds called dabbling ducks and diving ducks. So dabbling ducks will kind of dip their heads, and they're the ones you've seen with their butt up in the air when they're in the water. They'll go underground and start to eat things like plants that are growing underwater. They'll eat aquatic invertebrates. They'll eat seeds on the ground. They'll eat plants on the ground, and a multitude of other things. So they're pretty open-ended on what they eat. Like I said, some of them also eat fish, so they'll go hunting and eat things like that. So they do have a wide variety of things they eat, and it really does vary species to species. But the answer is pretty much anything that fits in their face.
Zach, are you a good swimmer?
Am I a good swimmer? I'm a pretty decent swimmer, yeah. I'm not as good as a duck, but I'm a pretty good.
Are you as good as a duck?
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, ducks have the advantage on me of a few million years of being adapted for swimming. I don't have that many, that's for sure.
All right, Zach, I know that you want to show some more animals in Body World's Animal Inside Out. Let's head on over to the caribou.
All right, caribou it is. So I guess as we're walking, do we have any questions that anybody wants answered? Well, we're walking over to the caribou.
What's your favorite animal?
What's my favorite animal? That's a really hard, because I get asked that frequently, and I really honestly don't know. I have several that I like. I think polar bears are really cool. I really love primates, gorillas. I love birds. I don't know if that was evident with my talk of ducks. And if I was to pick one, that's so hard. I really like elephants too. If I was to pick one, maybe polar bears. I don't know. That's tough. I like them all. They're all great in their own separate ways, except mosquitoes. Don't like that.
Hell yeah. You have favorites. I have favorites. So we're here at the caribou.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start off with the first question. Do you actually want to talk about the anatomy of the caribou and how it relates to humans as well?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we saw with the elephant that they're pretty similar to what we do, right, in terms of their body structure. And again, these guys are mammals too, right? They have fur on their body. They give birth to live young, like most other mammals, right? And so these guys will have, again, a pretty similar structure to us in a pretty different way. So one thing that you can really see are the antlers, which is a very, very noticeable thing amongst the deer family. So that is very different than us, obviously, because we don't have anything growing out of our head like that. And another big difference is the hooves. So these guys belong to a group called the artiodactyls, or the ungulates, which means that they have an even number of toed hooves. So they have two little cloven hooves at the front there that they use for helping them run through the snow. And that's something you see. It's a very big group that has those hooves. So pigs, cows, goats, deer, giraffes, hippos, they're all in that big group. Whales too, which is weird.
Even whales.
Even whales, yeah, they're descended. So remember how I was talking about with the dinosaurs, the birds coming out of dinosaurs? Whales kind of came out of that group as well. So yeah, weird, right? So if any of you went to when we had whales here a couple of years ago, you might have saw some stuff on that, like the fossil whales that had legs, like Ambulocetus and Pachycetus and things like that. So yeah, cool stuff.
Lots of cool stuff here. And things that most of us probably wouldn't know.
That's what I'm here for. Random facts that hopefully you remember and can like share at the dinner table.
You know what? A lot of us had this question too, and I think we asked you before we started the live, but Charity also asked, what's the difference between a caribou and a regular deer?
Great question. So caribou are a type of deer, and they're really well adapted for living in the Arctic. And they have something, so the big word of the day, this is what's called a circumpolar distribution, which means they basically live around the North Pole, right? And they come all the way down into like the northern climates. You can find them in like northern Alberta and even down into the mountains, into the Rocky Mountains a little bit. So they live around there. So they're very well adapted to cold weather compared to like a lot of other deer, right? So we find deer all over the world. There's many, many different species of deer, but these are basically the Arctic version of deer is what caribou are. And they're also known as reindeer, right? So if we're talking about them in North America, we typically call them caribou. And in Europe and like in Russia, they'll typically call them reindeer, but you know what? They're the exact same thing.
We have a question here on YouTube from Jacob, who's 8. Why do caribous have antlers?
Great question, Jacob. And I'm glad you asked that because caribou, you'll notice we have a male on one side and a female on the other. And all deer have antlers for a couple of reasons. For one, and the big one is that it's mostly for males to show off to females and say, look how big and impressive I am, right? But in most types of deers, females don't have antlers. Caribou are the exception, right? So you see the female has antlers, and that means, remember we were talking about with the elephants that the females didn't have those long tusks because they didn't need them? Well, they kept their antlers because the females actually need them to help survive. The antlers help them for digging out snow, and maybe they can find some plants underneath it, right? They're also handy for helping them protect their families and things like that. So there's a survival part of it, and that's why they have them. But what's really interesting about their antlers is antlers are some of the fastest growing tissue in the world. Like a male will grow a set of antlers like that within a few months, right? And then they lose them. They regrow them every single year. And what's really fascinating about that is the males, they lose their antlers after the mating season, which is about like November. And the females, they keep their antlers into the spring of the new year. So, of course, Santa's sleigh being pulled by reindeer. Do you think they're boys or girls that are pulling that sleigh then?
That is. Do you know the answer?
Yeah, they'd be girls. They'd be all of them. Rudolph, Donner, Blitzen, the whole gang. They're all girls. They're all female reindeer because if they have antlers at Christmas time, they're female reindeer.
That's amazing. Well, thanks for telling us that. That's awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We have another question here. How many caribou are left in Alberta, and are caribous endangered?
Yeah, so as an entire species, they're not endangered over the whole world. In Alberta, it depends on the population. So we have, you go up north into like northern Alberta, like, Fort McMurray and where all the forest is, the boreal forest. The boreal forest caribou, they're doing well. They have a lot of space in northern Alberta where they roam, right? And then the ones that come down to the Rocky Mountains, there's not as many of those. There's less area for them. They're in smaller herds. There used to be a herd that lived in Banff National Park, and I believe they died in an avalanche. But there are still some. I know it's tragic. There are still some caribou that do live in the Rocky Mountains around Jasper and other areas there. So we do still have caribou that come down, and they are at risk in Alberta. But as a species overall, not endangered yet, but they are at risk. As the Arctic warms up, obviously, an Arctic cold weather adapted species is going to have trouble for sure.
You know what, Zach? I've never been fortunate enough to see a caribou in real life, even though I've been in Alberta for a really long time. So seeing it in Body World's Animal Inside Out is such a unique experience with the anatomy and all of that as well. And we actually have a question from Javen. Our caribou looks like it's running.
Yeah.
And he would like to know, how fast can caribou run?
A lot faster than you and I can, Javen, that's for sure. So with their hooves, right, that means they have less spots touching down the ground, which means they have an ability to run a lot faster than we do. And the forelegs help them run faster for sure. And if you've ever tried to outrun your dog or your cat at home, pretty tricky, right? So they can run speeds pretty easily up to 50, 60 kilometers per hour, right? Whereas the best humans, they're getting up to like 30 kilometers per hour. That's like, Usain Bolt and people like that. And that's only over a short period. Deer can run very, very long and very far, right? And I mean, they're expert migrators too. So some of them that live up in the tundra, right, which are a little bit different from the ones that we have here in Alberta, they'll migrate all over the territories. So Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, basically the equivalent of walking from Calgary to Winnipeg and back every year.
Kayla asks, why are male caribou antlers bigger than females, and do their antlers serve a purpose?
Yeah, the basically reason, Kayla, is it makes those male caribou look really good to the lady caribou. The lady caribou really like bigger antlers. And there's a reason for that, and that's because every year those antlers regrow and they get bigger each year. So the bigger your antlers means you've been alive longer, which means you have pretty healthy genes that you haven't been eaten by a wolf or something yet. So it's a walking advertisement that says, hey, I'm big and I'm impressive and I've survived this long, and babies that we might have will be pretty healthy too. And you know what's funny is they'll actually cheat the system a little bit here. They'll go up to things like branches and moss, and they'll rub their antlers on it to make their antlers look even bigger, to be even more impressive. And a lot of people think they like to bash them together, but they don't. Typically what they'll do is mostly they just show each other, and the males with the bigger antlers will win those battles just by show. But if they're about the same size, that's when they'll lock antlers and start pushing on each other to show their strength. So that's what it's about.
For show.
Mostly for show.
That's so interesting. Who would have thought, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right?
we have 15 minutes left of the live, and I know you really want to go to the squid. So
Yeah.
shall we go there?
Let's head over to the squid. Yeah, and then if we have time at the end, we can do like a potpourri.
All right.
So yeah, I mean the caribou are one of my favorite animals too, because actually when they walk, they make a really fun snapping sound because they have like an elastic ligament in their legs that helps them to move their legs back really, really fast. It helps them when they're running, but you hear it even just when they're walking, like these snapping sounds. So I'll come around over here. Yeah, they're pretty neat. They feel very fuzzy because they have 2 layers of coat, so they're very soft. Right, and this animal is also soft because it doesn't have a backbone. It's a squid, so it's an invertebrate. Right, that's great segue. This one right here is one species of squid. We'll see another one here shortly. So ask us all your squid questions.
All right, we're going to start off with the first one. How deep can a giant squid dive?
You know what? We don't even really know. That's a great question. The giant squid is one of those animals that we don't know a lot about because it lives so deep in the ocean. The deep depths of the ocean are one of the least explored places in the entire world. Like that is like the great place for exploration now because there's so much that's unknown down there. And we didn't even see a live giant squid until I believe it was 2004, right? So we don't exactly know how deep they go, but we know that they go way, way deeper than humans or most animals can go, right? So we're talking thousands of meters under the sea. And one thing we do know is those whales that hunt them, so things like sperm whales, they'll dive down. And so they can actually, when the sperm whales are up, give them a little tag to see how deep the sperm whales are going. And they're going thousands of meters under the water. And they'll come back and they'll have things like suction cup marks from battles with squids. And when like you see their tummy, you'll see like that they have bits of squid in there. So we know that they're eating squid that they find deep under the water. So that's a good indication that the squid are at least living there, but the squid might go deeper and we don't exactly know. So yeah, that's a good question.
So giant squids eat tinier squids?
You know what? Again, we don't exactly know, but definitely they would if they got them in their mouth because they would eat fish, they would eat squid, they would eat other invertebrates that live under the water, right? So they're moving through the water column, so they're not on the bottom of the ocean, right? Which means there's a lot of fish down there, and there's a lot of other squid, and those would definitely be great sources of food for a giant squid.
Awesome. We have questions coming in here. Felix asks, is the squid the same as an octopus?
You know what? That's a great question, Felix. They're actually a little bit different, and that's one of the biggest things is their body shape. And we actually have an octopus here too to kind of compare them. The octopus, of course, very famously, its name means 8 legs, right? And then squid, they actually have typically 10. So you'll have the 8 kind of around, and then they have 2 long ones that they use for grabbing things. So that's one difference. But the other big difference is kind of just in their general shape, the eyes, right? The eyes of squid tend to be bigger, right? Octopus, they tend to live on the bottom of the ocean and traipse around, right? Whereas squid, they live in the open water and swim up and down through the water column. So they have different adaptations. They're quite different, but they're both within the group called cephalopods, which are a type of mollusk, so similar to like, a snail or clam, right? But they're in their own group. So octopus, squid, and things like cuttlefish, and nautilus is the other one, which is the only one that still has a shell.
Do squids also have 3 hearts like octopuses?
Yeah, they do. They have 3 hearts, and their brain is shaped like a donut, which is a really random fun fact. And the best part about it is their esophagus, so the thing where they swallow down their food, it runs right through the middle of their donut brain, which means they have to make sure that they're chewing their food very small, because otherwise their esophagus will get too big and press on their brain and they'll have a bad day.
We have a question here on YouTube from Victoria, who's 10. How long is the longest squid? And is that the longest squid?
This one right here is not the longest squid. You know what? We were actually trying to look up what species of squid was, and we failed. But we know it's a big squid. But it's not the biggest squid. The biggest squid in the world is the colossal squid. But we're going to show you the giant squid, which is the second largest species in the world. So this right here, you can see, I'm about 6'2". So you can imagine I'm a pretty tall guy, but you can see this is way bigger than I am, right? So this one's kind of split in half. Usually a giant squid's body, on average, typically they know about them from ones that wash up on shore. So they have to do a little bit of guessing. Their body, so their part with like they call that the mantle, right? And where their eyes would be in their head, that part would be about as big as me. And then their tentacles can be many, many more times that length. So we're talking like 18, 20 feet long, right? And that's pretty big, right? That's a pretty big animal. So imagine like, say 3 or 4 of me stacked on top of each other.
We all know that squids squirt ink. Mm-hmm. So we have Amy, who is 14 years old, on YouTube, asking, is the ink of the squid stored somewhere in the body?
Yeah, you know what? They have a special sac. It's a good question, Amy. They have a special sac called an ink sac. And when something frightens them, makes them nervous, they'll press it and they'll squirt out that ink, and basically it disorients predators or whatever, right? So that they're like, oh, I don't know where the squid went. And squid are among the fastest moving animals in the ocean, right? So they jet away pretty fast. So yeah, though, and it's and I can tell you from my time when I was a zoology student, we would do squid dissections, and it's something you want to avoid in the dissection because the ink gets everywhere and it makes your dissections very difficult. But yeah, it's a tiny little sac that they have in their ink.
And Zach, earlier you mentioned that squid really like to eat fishes, sometimes even other tinier squids. So being wants to know, is there something specific that they eat?
Well, Sabina, that's a good question. And kind of like we were talking about ducks, like it totally depends on the species, right? Like there's so many different types of squid. We're like, I think we looked up, there was like 300 species of squids about. And we don't exactly know because, again, there's so much parts of the ocean we don't know about. But they eat many, many different things. So some tiny, tiny little squid will eat plankton, right? And even baby squid, right? They'll eat plankton as well. And then you get these giant guys, which are eating, big fish and other squid. And one of them is a really interesting one called the Humboldt squid. They live off the western coast of South America. And their nickname is like the vampire squid, not because they drink blood, but because they like go after like everything. And they're very, very voracious predators. They'll try to basically eat anything they can get their tentacles on.
It kind of sounds like me.
Yeah.
It's almost lunchtime. We have a question here from Magnolia. So what the visitors are seeing right now are those cups on the tentacles.
Yeah.
How many sucker cups are on all of the squid's tentacles altogether?
Lots. I'll tell you what, I'll challenge you when we reopen. We can come down and count. No, I don't know. You know what? It depends on the squid, because some of them have really, really, really big bodies, and the bigger tentacles you have, the more suction cups you'll have, right? And those suction little suckers, they basically help them to grab onto things and hold on to them and pull them towards their mouth, right? And yeah, some of them do have hooks on them, especially the grabbing arms. They'll have hooks, and that grabs on even better, right? So the food is not getting away. Once it's snapped in those long arms, they pull them in. The rest of the tentacles will grab onto things and make sure that none of that food is escaping as they bring it into their beak, right? And that's how they eat their food, and make sure it's very small so they don't squish the brain.
Sweet. We have another question here about when did we discover squid and how?
Oh, wow. The giant squid or the squid overall? I guess I'll answer both. So squid overall, I mean, we've known about squid as long as people have kind of been fishing in the ocean, right? Because some squid, like some smaller species, they hang out right near the shore and people could go and catch them and eat them, right? But squid, many species of squid live in the deep, open parts of the ocean, which of course we didn't start exploring, from many years later. So it depends. It totally depends again on the species and where they live and that kind of thing. But squid in general, we've known about for a very, very long time. Giant squid, the way we kind of know about them is when they would like wash up on shore, right? And so again, there's been giant squid washing up on shore as long as human history has kind of been able to record it. But because they live so deep in the ocean, no one was able to see them alive until, like, I believe it was 2004. And in 2006 or so, that was when they pulled up and there was a giant squid that was like attached to like a bait thing. And they actually got to see it at the surface, what a giant squid actually looks like at the surface. So that was the first time. So they're pretty elusive. And I mean, the depths of the ocean is a pretty big space where they're hiding. So, but yeah, we've known about squid for sure for a very long time.
And that was pretty recent too when we discovered that.
Yeah, when we actually got to see them. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, that's probably many of us remember that. So yeah, for sure.
Well, that's the beauty about science, right? Like, there's always more to discover, always more to learn.
That's right. Science is never done, right? You got to keep on learning and trying new things and experimenting with things, because even sometimes we think something's right and then we learn something new. Like a good example I was talking about with the dinosaurs, right? How many years did people think that dinosaurs, were these big, slow-moving reptiles, right? And then more and more discoveries and research was done, and we found out, oh no, they had feathers, a lot of them, right? And had different things, and we're learning new things about them all the time. So definitely science is an ongoing thing.
I gotta tell you too, Zach, like sometimes with science and the unknown comes fear.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of the unknown. So I have to ask you, do squids bite? Do they have teeth?
No, good question. I'll try not to. Yeah, they don't have teeth. They have a beak, right? And like I said, when they grab onto something, they'll pull it in and start eating at it with its beak, right? Kind of like we would with our teeth. So they don't have teeth like we do. And then once the food is in the mouth, they have something that is actually one of my favorite words in science called a radula. And it's almost like a tongue with a conveyor belt of teeth on it that rasps away at the food and makes it really, really tiny so that they can digest it. So in terms of if you have to worry about a squid hunting you when you're in the ocean, I don't think that's very likely. But like I said, there are some species of squid, like the Humboldt squid. I know they've been pretty aggressive to people before, but as long as you're not swimming deep off the coast of like Peru or something, you're probably okay. And even then, I mean, you're probably okay. The chances of anything like that, like I know sharks are a classic thing. People like worry about swimming because, of course, there's so much we don't see under the water. It's only natural to be afraid of what we don't see or know, right? But shark attacks are so rare and so infrequent. Like you have a better chance of dying from coconut falling on your head than being attacked by a shark. So, right. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't respect them in their space, because I mean, whether they're a giant squid or a shark or a cow or something, they're all big, powerful animals that can, so we got to make sure we respect their space. Yeah.
For sure. Well, it's a good thing I can't swim, Zach.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Delane. She said, "Thank you so much for doing this. Delane would like to know if squid have gills."
Oh yeah, they do have gills. So yeah, because I mean they need to be able to breathe underwater. So yeah, Delane, that's a good question. The gills aren't exactly the same as a fish, right? So obviously fish have the gill covers for many types of fish, or sharks, they'll have the different number of gills on the side of their head. So they have gills as well, and they bring them in that way as well. So they would have to breathe underwater through their gills as well, for sure. Yeah, good question.
Zach, do you know how fast squids can swim?
Really fast. I don't have a number actually. That one is that's a good question actually. We're getting near the end, and I'm officially like, I don't really have a full answer for that one. I know it's fast. I know they're amongst the fastest swimming animals in the ocean. And what they do is they take in water into their mantle, which is this top part here, and then they squish it, right? And that force the air out of a little tube called the siphon or the jet, and it's right kind of underneath there. And they shoot that water out really fast. It propels them basically backwards that way, very, very quickly. So they move very, very fast. Definitely faster, like I said, than I can swim. And actually most animals, including fish, and they have to be, because if they're a predator, they have to move faster if you're a predator than the prey that you're trying to catch. Otherwise, you're not going to have a very long life.
Zach, my friend Preet actually gave me this fact, and I think they can swim 11.2 meters per second.
That's pretty fast.
That's so fast.
Thanks, Preet.
So
yeah, there we go. We have the friends helping us out. Like, who wants to be a millionaire? Call a friend. Right? Yeah.
I call Preet.
Yeah.
All right, Zach. So in Body World's Animal Inside Out, all of these animals are real and they're plastinated and they've been recolored. So we have a question here that asks from Ayla, who's 9, what color is a squid?
That is a great question. And squid are one of the most amazing animals in the colors that they can produce, because their skin actually has these kind of cells called chromatophores, which are basically color producing cells. And they'll actually be able to change them. So depending on their mood, their temperature, and the species, of course, that's all very, very important, the type of squid, they can actually change their color, right? So many types of squid we think of are like white, right? And especially if they live deep down in the ocean, doesn't do you a heck of a lot of good to have any color because no one can see it because it's all dark. But they can do things like bioluminescence, right? So creating light within their body to draw attention to them, right? And other squid that live close to the surface will have all kinds of weird funky colors, right? But when they brought the giant squid to the surface, it had kind of that darker red color, right? That on the outside, but that may not be the color that it is all the time because they have that ability to change their colors so much.
My Spark friends, we have 3 more minutes for questions. So if you have any questions for Zach, make sure you plug them in the comment section. We're going to try to answer as much as possible.
3 minutes, like rapid fire.
Rapid fire. Here we go. You ready, Zach?
Let's do it.
Artist asks, do all squids ink? And if so, the same color of ink?
Yeah, to my knowledge, all squids ink. Yeah, they all have an ink sac, and it is virtually all black, right? Dark and murky to distract them. Yeah, good question, Artist.
Victoria asks, why are their eyes so big, and how big are they?
The biggest eyes, so the giant squid will have eyes the size of a dinner plate, right? And that's because they live deep down in the ocean where there's not a lot of light. So having a bigger eye means you get more light in, which means you might actually be able to see things, even in the deep, dark water. So having a big eye helps them see better in the dark water.
Taz and Layla asks, how many babies do they have?
Countless. So when squid have babies, they lay lots and lots of eggs, and those eggs will float up and join the plankton. Or some of them will actually paste them to the ground. Depends on the species. But there's lots. They're one of those animals that just basically just has tons and tons of babies and hopes that they don't get eaten.
Kayla on YouTube asks, do squids blink?
Do squids blink? No, squids don't blink. They don't have an eyelid, right? So just like fish, right? Because they live in water, the reason we blink is because eyes are living tissue. Living tissue needs to be wet, right? And where skin, the outer layer of our skin, it's dry, it's dead skin cells, right? So that's why we have eyelids, to help our eyes continue to do what they need to do. But because they're living in the water, they don't need that. So fish, squid, pretty much any animal that lives in the water doesn't necessarily need to have an eyelid.
Zach, it looks like we have 1 minute left.
Shucks.
So I would like to give you this time to tell us your favorite animal fact that you've got in the back of your pocket.
Oh, the first one that comes to my mind, I don't know if any of you are familiar with wombats. They're a little marsupial. Well, they're not little. They're about like that big. They live in Australia, and they basically kind of live like badgers in tunnels under the ground. And what's a really fun fact about them is their poop is cube-shaped. So you can actually like stack their poop like building blocks, right? And that's so that they can nicely push it out of their tunnels. But you always know when a wombat is pooping nearby, that's for sure. So I think that's about it for our time. So thank you, everybody, for joining us and asking such fun questions and even stumping me with one. So right on. And next week, I know we'll be talking about space and the James Webb Telescope Observatory. So make sure you tune in next Wednesday. And hopefully we'll see you guys again and talk more random animal dinosaur facts. So thank you again for checking in. Hope to see you here soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.